Everybody, welcome on back to Ezfishtanks. Today we're going to be checking out a video from FatherFish. This is a longtime aquarium hobbyist. He's got a lot of really good insight and knowledge. I don't agree with every single thing he says, but I think he does have some really good points. That's a beautiful Siamese algae eater right there, by the way. But yeah, so he has a new video out called The Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Dirt Substrate Planted Aquarium. So I figured we'd jump in and see what he has to say about it. Kind of see what I agree with, maybe what I don't agree with, what I do in common with him, and what tips I could possibly pick up from him. So without further ado, let's jump in and see what he has to say.
10% water change 2 or 3 times a year. Lighting.
Wow, he jumps right off with the low water changes. 2 to 3 water changes a year seems kind of low, but if you have really low stocking and you also have a lot of plants in your tank, you could probably get away with that. I have 2 tanks behind me here. This is my beta tank I redid. This is a dirted beta tank. You can't see it, but he swam right up to my finger. This is a dirted tank. I have probably about over half of that tank is going to be covered with plants. And there's no filter in this tank either. And it's been set up about 2 months. And I've only done 1 water change on it. And everybody's doing really well. So if you keep your stocking low, you have enough plants, you could definitely get away with that. Okay, he's saying 24/7 lights on. That seems pretty intense.
24/7 for the first 2 weeks.
Okay, for the first 2 to 4 weeks.
75% of the tank in plants. The dirt is comprised.
Yeah, so again, if you're going to do a dirty tank, there's a lot of nutrients obviously in the dirt compared to your inert substrate. So you're going to want to have a ton of plants. Essentially, as many plants as you can fit into the tank is going to be your best bet to keep from having your nitrogen and your ammonia levels increase too much. The only time I haven't done that is with my dueling peaks build that we set up not too long ago. But I have a filter in that tank and I monitor it. So if need be, I can do water changes more frequently on that. But I'd say probably only about 20%, maybe about 15% of that plant or of that tank is planted. The rest, I wanted that to focus on the dragon stones. But this is your general guideline here. Okay, 4 ingredients. I imagine this is for the compost that he makes or the soil he makes.
Of 4 items. And the supplement is 15 different minerals. So what you're creating is a natural environment.
I wonder how many minerals are in like the general organic potting material that we buy from like Home Depot or Lowe's, because that's what I use. I'd imagine there's probably 15 or more minerals in your organic potting soil that you're buying from a hardware store.
Possible for it to sustain itself.
Those are beautiful rainbow fish.
Well, hello. Come right on in.
All right, let's come right on in. FatherFish, he seems so cool. He seems like a nice guy.
The dirt is comprised of 4 items. Number 1, it's 50% some kind of humic material.
Always read that as hummus, like the kind you dip your chip into. I think it's pronounced humus. I don't know. I think it's spelled exactly the same too. But anyways, now I'm hungry.
Now I use peat moss because peat moss is still available in the US.
I've never used peat moss. I've honestly, the most I do to mix with my soil when I put them in the tank, and I don't do it all the time. I actually mainly just do this for my potted plants, is I'll take my organic compost or my organic soil, and then I mix in some play sand or some other inert sand for drainage. But I don't really do that in my planted tanks. And he said he uses peat moss because it's still legal in the United States. I believe a few countries have outlawed peat moss because the farming of peat moss is pretty bad for carbon emissions.
It's not in Europe and it's not in Canada.
Okay, Europe and Canada, it's not in.
Coir, C-O-I-R, that's coconut fiber. You can use ground up leaves, not green leaves. The leaves that fall from the tree.
Now, I'll add leaves and other botanicals from my yard, and kind of like when I go on walks with my family, I'll add those on into my tank. I don't ground them up. I kind of use them more as like an accent to the tank. In my like 30-gallon guppy tank I have over there, I have some like seed pods that I found on walks, things like that. But I generally just buy bagged organic soil. It's a bit easier. I'm sure this is a great way to go about it though.
Trees this time of the year. It's very important if you're going to use leaves not to pick them off the tree and dry them, because they will contain all of the sugars, so any kind of humic material.
Interesting. I wonder what kind of sugars he's talking about here. Obviously, like during photosynthesis, plants are going to produce sugar. I wonder how that would be detrimental to the tank. I'm not really clear on what the added sugar in the tank, why that would be so bad. The only thing I could think of is that your green material, like if you were to pick them right off the trees, those are going to have a higher nitrogen content versus your browning material or your dried material. Just like if you're trying to compost at home, if any of you guys compost, you know that you need to strike a balance between nitrogen and carbon. So the green is your nitrogen. Anything brown in your yard, more or less, besides like dog poo, you know, dried leaves, dried grass, that's going to have a higher carbon content. That's what I would think would be the reason for not picking it off the tree. But apparently sugars are not good for your tank.
That's 50% of the soil layer. 25% is some kind
oh man, he's going to go
of
straight cow manure.
Any kind of compost at all. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be pond muck.
I'd be pretty nervous to use straight cow manure or chicken manure in my tanks. Now, I use it for reseeding my yard all the time. I used to own a landscaping business, and I would buy chicken manure and steer manure and spread that directly on top of fresh seed. And it does have a lot of nutrients, a lot of nitrogen that promotes growth. Nitrogen is going to promote your green growth. So I could see that working. I would just be worried about the pure ammonia content that is going to be in straight cow manure.
It can be black cow. It can be compost from your compost.
And there we go, back to the compost.
Composted material.
Another reason to compost,
it's
people.
Organic that's broken down. The third item is soil.
That soil makes sense. All right.
Happens in soil. The third item is 25%. So we've got 50% humus.
Wow, look at those guppies. Those are stunning guppies. Yeah, see, he kind of does the same thing. So he mixes the leaf litter into his substrate, and then he's also going to use that as kind of a botanical, little visually appealing aspect to the tank. It's also going to release tannins, which are also, from what I understand, good for fish health.
25% soil, 25% organics, and then 10% FatherFish supplement.
Oh, FatherFish supplement. Is he selling supplements now?
15 different minerals, any one of which could not exist in the mix you have, any one of which could be quickly depleted. What this does is bring those minerals.
Look at that. Look at that Nerite snail. I love Nerite snails. Nerite snails are so cool. I have a couple of them in my tank. I've even had horned Nerite snails. Horned Nerite snails look super cool. Yeah, as the name would suggest, they got little horns on them, and they look super cool. All right, well, we'll see. We'll see how much of this video is him just trying to push his minerals, and how much of this is easy to understand advice for beginners and people looking to get into doing the dirt as substrate.
Into the material such that they will be there as needed. The reason for this is really very simple. You can't go back in and add them. You can put fertilizer in the water.
Yeah.
But
I mean, saying that you can't go back in and add minerals to the tank, I think that's a little bit of far-fetched. There's a bunch of different ways you could add minerals to your substrate. They sell those little discs that you can drop into your tank. You can push that down in the substrate. That'll be fine. You typically don't want to disturb your dirt substrates, but if you were to replant a plant into your substrate, you're going to be fine. So you could definitely add minerals to your established tank, whether you do that through the liquid drops or little pellets you put in the soil.
But that's
my opinion, at least.
And fertilizer is a problem anyway, because it screws with the hormonal activity that the plant is engaged in. Now,
I also don't really know about that. This guy might be far more, in fact, I'll say he's probably a lot more educated about these things than me. But I'm not too worried about the hormonal balance of the plants in my tank. I want the plants in my tank to look good, and I want them not to be covered in algae, and I want them to filter my tank. So that's not something I'm really worried about. I tend not to micromanage my tank and let it do its own thing. So I would say if you notice a deficiency in your tank, add some fertilizer. I don't really use fertilizer. but go ahead and add it. Don't worry about your plant's hormones. Your plants will be fine.
Element that we put in.
Nice little rams.
Substrate is
Oh, they dodged me. There's some nice rams in this tank, though.
Buffers. And we've got a number of different.
See, I believe this is it's either crypt or vallisneria up front here. He's got some hornwort growing in the back. And then this is like a lotus leaf. These are cool. You can buy this red lotus right here. You can buy those from like Home Depot, or not Home Depot, from Petco. And they come just as bulbs. And you just stick them right down in the soil and they grow like crazy. They're awesome. They'll eventually grow to the top and be like, what's the word I'm looking for? A lily pad to be. I tend to keep mine trimmed. If you trim them frequently, I'm cutting here, you can't see. If you trim them frequently, then they won't grow all the way to the surface and they'll stay kind of tighter like that.
Buffers. Lime is one. Bone meal is another. Sodium bicarbonate is another. A fourth one is diatomaceous.
Beautiful neons in there.
All of which prevent
some sort of
the
tetra.
substrate
I'm not sure what the
from
tetra is.
becoming acidic. If it becomes acidic, it becomes deadly. All of these elements will, as they become part of the plant life, part of the life of the other microorganisms in that soil,
beautiful angelfish,
converted as those elements die and be returned to the soil in the life cycle. So it all cycles. It cycles as an environment. So
I will say that's why I tend not to. I think what he's getting off here is that's why when I have plants that kind of die off in my tank, I just leave that in there. I let all that stuff try to break down and get reintroduced into the soil. Same thing if you saw my video on trimming up my 30-gallon guppy and shrimp tank. I have a layer of mum, just like decaying, breaking down organic material on the bottom of my tanks or on the top of my substrate. And I let that stuff just stay in there. Eventually it's all going to get turned over and it's all going to get down into the soil. And that's like your fertilizer, right? I do the same thing with my garden at home, as long as my wife lets me. I like to just leave the leaves in the planters. That way they'll eventually break down and return the nutrients to the planters themselves. And then you don't have to fertilize as often.
You're creating is a natural environment that cycles all of the elements of that environment in a way that makes it possible for it to sustain itself virtually.
Real quick, dude. This looks like a mix, his little icon up here. Whenever I look at that, I see a mix of Popeye the Sailor Man and Hugh Hefner. I don't know if it's just me, but it looks like Popeye the Sailor Man and Hugh Hefner to me.
Now, once the soil is put together, put water in it, create a mud, let it sit for a day. Of that material.
Interesting. I've never done that. I've never pre-mixed my substrate. If you guys see my videos, I put the dirt in dry, and then sometimes if I'm not feeling too lazy, then I'll go ahead and I'll spray it down with a little spray bottle I have. Move this camera down so you can see all my stupid hand motions. I'll spray it down with a little spray bottle I have just to keep it nice and compact. But I've never pre-mixed it like that. I've never made it mud before putting it in the tank because it's going to become mud as soon as you add water.
Material, you want no more than 1 inch in a tank less than 55
yeah, that's about the rule I go by.
If it's bigger than 55 gallons, you can add another half inch up to 100 gallons. At 100 gallons plus, you can go to 2 inches. In my 200-gallon tank, I never went beyond
beautiful
2
angelfish
inches.
in there.
It's very important.
The biggest tank I've ever done on a dirted tank is my 60-gallon community tank that I've shown you guys. That one's dirted. I did about the same thing, about an inch of soil, and then I capped that with black sand. It looks real clean, real nice. And remember, these are all like guidelines. None of these are like you have to do it by the buck or you're going to have problems. It's all about experimenting in this hobby. I love that rummy nose tetra right there. I have some rummy nose tetras too. You can see there's that lotus in the back. So he hasn't trimmed this one. So now it's shot all the way up to the top of the tank.
To have double the amount
little
of
Corey
sand as there is soil. So in less than a 55-gallon tank, 1 inch of the soil mixture, 2 inches of sand. And the reason for this is the soil is going to rise up in the sand, but it'll only come up as deep as it is. In other words, it'll come up about 1 inch.
Interesting. I've never really noticed how far it actually comes up. Let's see. Let's take a look back here. Yeah, I guess a little bit. I guess it'll start to work its way up a little bit. But yeah, I think a good general rule of thumb is 1 inch of soil, 2 to 3 inches of sand. If you want to put more, great. I wouldn't go any less than 2 inches though. Look at these coolie loaches. These little noodles are hilarious. And I think that's a Serpe tetra right there too. I had some of these noodles before, but I don't like to put any of these in my dirty tanks because I find that they can cause some problems in the dirty tank because they like to dig. And then that's the one thing about a dirty tank. If the dirt gets into the water column, you're going to have an issue with your ammonia and your nitrates. And it's not good overall.
Into the sand. So if you've got 2 inches, it's not going to escape into the water column.
Oh, hold on. I want to go back. Where is this? Look at this guy right here. This guy is ready for his water change. Right here with this orange Home Depot bucket. This guy is ready to do a water change. I like his style. I like it.
It's not going to escape.
We'll go back up here.
It'll still be in the sand bed.
It's a pretty little beta. Got some pork chop rasboras in the back too.
We'll be able to use that as nutrients. In the beginning, when you first set this tank up, the organics are extremely active.
Yo, this guy spams his videos with these pop-up ads. My God. I mean, yeah, self-promote, but I think I've seen like 5 or 6 different ads pop up here. This is a beautiful little beta, and I do love the pork chop rasboras. They're great. He's rocking a little sponge filter in the back too.
Got a lot of bubbling, a lot of gas,
got the cichlid hides,
chelation going on.
Some Enthusiast.
A bowl or plastic bag over it. Put the water in. When it's full, do it in, and then to the top, take it out.
Oh, is that an Amazon sword? That was huge.
You want 50 to 75% of the tank in plants. It's not 1 or 2 plants, 10 or 20 or 30 or 40. You want a lot of plants. You need it heavily planted. Yeah,
he's right. Oh, look at that little auto sinkless right there. Look at that little auto sinkless. I love auto sinkless. They're so cool. This is a really pretty tank. I like the splash of red and the green and the botanicals. But yeah, so you're going to want to plant as heavy as you can afford, right? So again, not everybody is going to have $300-400 to go out and buy all these plants. So you want to start small. Start with a 5, 10, 20 gallon dirty tank where you can afford to buy enough plants. So say, let's go on the low end of it, right? Most people are going to buy a 10 gallon tank. You buy a 10 gallon tank, you buy your dirt from Home Depot, make sure it's organic. You buy some play sand, you're out $20 right there, right? You go and spend $50 on some plants from Petco or your local fish store, and you plant those. As those grow, you can trim those and replant them and replant them and replant them and trim those and trim those and trim those. And eventually you'll have a big collection and you could step your tank size up without having to go out and spend like $300-400 on plants. I find most people that are looking to do a dirty tank aren't the kind of people that have the kind of resources where they want to go out and drop $400, $500, $200, fuck it, even $100 on plants, right? It gets expensive quick. So start small, cultivate your own plants just by trimming them, and you'll be able to achieve these goals on a larger scale.
From the beginning, the best kind of plants to put in there are stem plants, Vallisneria, chain swords, those kinds of things that are fast growing plants.
I love Val. Oh, an Acaris. This is embarrassing. I can never grow an Acaris. It's supposed to be like the easiest plant ever. I can never grow an Acaris. It always just dies in my tank. I don't know. Crazy. Yeah, I got Val taking over in this tank back over here. It is done really well. It's taking over my whole tank. I'm going to have to move it and plant it. Oh, yeah, I see one of my emerald shrimp too. I haven't seen them in a while. Yeah, get some stem plants. Get some fast growing plants. You know, your Anubias and your Java ferns, those aren't really going to do a great job at pulling the kind of nutrients you need to be pulled out of the water column. But I'm sure he'll mention this too, floating plants. So if you can't afford a bunch of stem plants, if you can get some stem plants in and then your cheap Java ferns and Anubias, if you put stem plants on the top, or if you put floaters on the top of your tank, those are going to pull a ton of nutrients out. So there's other ways to do it.
Which is a stem plant. Things are going to grow quickly, take hold, and begin cycling immediately. Plants remove ammonia directly. If you have plants in there, you may test for ammonia, but you don't need to worry about it because the plants are controlling. If the roots of the plants are planted down into the dirt, they will burn. It will kill the plant. So you never plant below 1 inch. Let the root find the nutrition.
Now, I'm not sure if the roots will actually get burned in the dirt. I guess it really depends on like how much nutrients you have in there, right? If you have a ton of nitrogen, like maybe with his steer manure mixture, that would burn the roots of the plant. Because if you have too much nitrogen, that will burn plants. That's just like if you spread fertilizer on your lawn and you don't water it insufficiently, that nitrogen sitting on, where's my camera? That nitrogen sitting on top of your lawn without being watered in will burn your grass. That's why you get those brown spots on your grass after you fertilize if you don't water it in well enough. Now, I tend not to plant directly into the dirt in my tanks because I have such a thick layer of sand. So maybe some roots would burn. I feel like more maybe if you just plant them into the mud that they'll get root rot, and that is what causes it, because you're going to get more oxygenation inside the sand, even though you're underwater, inside the sand than you are in like mud. So maybe it's just the amount of nitrogen he uses in his mix though.
Introduce it directly. Roots
look at that crebensis. Beautiful.
Nutrition. So you don't need to push them all the way down in there. If you do in a brand new tank, the plant's going to die. There's a process called chelation that occurs. Chelation is simply what happens when minerals or compounds are put together.
Beautiful little mystery snail too. Look at that guy. He's just chilling. He's just doing his thing. I've never heard this term this guy's talking about, so let's let him keep talking.
That are active. They are active with each other or reactive with each other. The less reactive
tiger barbs and mollies. That's cool. It's a cool tank.
Eventually they become chelate.
My wife loves tiger barbs.
No longer active with each other. That's what happens in that deep substrate. We got elements in there, chemicals in there that are in process of chelation. That takes a few months to complete.
Chelation. Okay, that's a new vocab word for us.
2 to 3 months. So you're going to have gas bubbles coming off. The gas is CO2 and nitrogen. Nothing that's dangerous. Nothing that.
I do see that in my tanks. So a lot of my newly set up dirted tanks, I'll notice the first couple months if I am cleaning, not so much when I'm cleaning, but when I'm walking by them in the room and that vibration is kind of disturbing the substrate, I will notice little bubbles pop up. And it's never caused any problems in the tank, just like he's saying, you know, it's nothing dangerous. But I have noticed that. So I guess that's called chelation. Okay? Basically, you're just having gas exchange.
It's going to create a problem at all. You got buffers in there.
It's a big old amino shrimp.
Acidic. It's not going to be tough.
Add your fish. That's the best part.
Put a few fish in the tank. The tank will already be in process of balancing ammonia to nitrates. The nitrogen cycle will already be in place. It'll already be occurring. The plants will be absorbing ammonia as it's created. Now, clearly, you don't want to feed heavily in the first week or two. When I put a few fish in there, I do not put food in there. I don't put food in for the first week. None of any kind.
So I suppose how he's doing what's called the fish in cycle, right? So that's kind of like you're instantly cycling the tank. I do the same process, but I always add beneficial bacteria. You can get the beneficial bacteria in like a bottle, and I'll add that in. I do tend to feed before the first week, and I'll be completely honest. In every tank I've set up in the last maybe 5 years, I've done a fish in cycle, and I've not lost one fish. No bullshit. I've not lost one fish. I've lost fish in established tanks that I've had for a few years due to whatever reason, right? I mean, fish die, but this fish in cycle is kind of demonized in the community quite a bit. But if you do it responsibly by not putting in, you know, I got my 5 gallon back here with these green Cutabi rasboras, right? Those are a little more sensitive fish. I did not cycle this tank first. I added, I have it right here. Here we go. I added my biological booster and I fed very lightly and every single fish survived. There was no problems. I had a fish dead in the bag when I bought him, but no, I have not lost a single fish in there. Everybody's doing healthy. So you can definitely get away with the fish in cycle if you know what you're doing, if you're not overfeeding, and I highly recommend using some kind of biological booster. It's bacteria that's going to break down the ammonia in your tank. It's bacteria that breaks down the ammonia in your tank and turns it into things called nitrates and nitrites. So if you already have some bacteria in there to break those things down to make them less harmful, you're going to be good.
We'll be picking away on the plant or whatever's on the bottom.
It's an interesting collection he's got in there.
And if you don't believe me, watch them pooping in that week you're not feeding. They will be pooping. And the only way they can poop is if they're eating. So then begin feeding every week, add a few more fish. I do lighting 24/7 for the first at least 2 weeks, if not a month, in order to give the plants
That's a lot of lighting.
head start, and in order to make sure that all the organics in there are able to do whatever photosynthesis.
I always run all of my planted tanks and my dirted planted tanks on a 12-hour schedule. I found for myself personally, 12 hours gave me the perfect amount of light for plant growth without having to constantly be battling against too much hair algae. You will get algae, but without having to get too much hair algae or blackbeard algae. I do have blackbeard algae and some other algae in my 30-gallon over here, but it's all checked. It's all kept in it's all maintained. It's balanced out and it's not taking over everything. It's staying in its localized area. And it's been like that for months, minus my little algae, a little like clump of hair algae that I have that all the shrimp have decided to nest in. Well, not nest, but hang out in.
They need to do and gain the benefit of the light cycle that first couple of weeks. After that, you can back up on it. If you start getting algae, put more plants in. If you get algae, it means you don't have enough plants, because plants take nutrients out of the water before algae does.
Well, true, right? True. But it could also mean that you just have your lights on too long, right? So you don't have to, oh, I have some algae, let me go spend another $30 on plants, right? Try cranking your light down by an hour or two first and see how that goes. I mean, plants are great for the tank, but just because you have plants in your tank doesn't mean you're going to avoid all your problems, right? You still got to monitor it. You still got to keep your lighting in check. So, I mean, theoretically, I guess you could just keep buy plants, or just turn your lights down a little bit.
I find that it makes me feel better.
I love Siamese algae
do
eaters.
A 10% water change in my tank 2 or 3 times a year. Whether I really need to do that or not, I'm not at all certain. But I do it because
That's a beautiful
it gives
tank.
me a comfort level.
I'll say that's kind of the same way I do my water changes. If I look at my tank and I just feel like it needs a water change, I'll do a water change. But generally how I base my water changes off, besides for like testing, which again, I've had these tanks, I've been doing this for a long time, so I'm not constantly testing my tanks. But how I do it is if I look at the tank from the side, or if I scoop out a little bit of water and it looks kind of like yellowy, I go off of the coloration of the water when I do my water changes. And again, I know people are gonna be like, oh, you gotta test your tank all the time. You gotta constantly test your tank. Like, no, you don't. If you're new to the hobby, test your tank. Definitely test your tank. But if you've been in the hobby like myself for 20, 25 years, you have a pretty good idea of how these things are going.
That's how you set the tank up.
That's how you set the tank up. That's how you do it. All right, well, this was Father Fish. I like his videos. You know, again, like I said, I don't like agree blindly with everything he says, but I do like his demeanor. I do like that he's very knowledgeable. He knows a lot about dirted tanks. He knows a lot about the Wallstead method, and he's a pretty interesting dude. So if you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave me a like and think about subscribing, and also go check out his channel. I'll leave a link for his channel in my description so you guys can go check him out. He's got a lot of really good videos. He seems like a generally like pretty cool dude. So he could be a little extreme on some things. You know, how it's kind of how it is in the fish hobby. Sometimes people get super opinionated, but he does have good information. So go ahead and check him out. Well, all right, everybody. Thanks again for watching. Always appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to hang out with me and look at fish, talk about fish, look at plants, you know, enjoy the whole process. So I hope you guys have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next video. See ya.